4 words, hidden on page 47 of a policy manual. Nobody had read it since 2009. Those 4 words cost one institution $40 million. By the end of this, you'll look at every form you've ever signed very differently. Stay with me because this one gets uncomfortable fast. Meridian Bank looked bulletproof from the outside. Decades of operation, billions in assets. Regulators praised it publicly. Leadership handed each other awards at annual galas. Everything gleamed. But institutions that look the most stable are often the ones that stopped questioning themselves the longest. Meridian hadn't stress-tested its internal approval process in years. Nobody had needed to. Nothing had visibly broken. That process, 17 steps for authorizing interdepartmental fund transfers, was considered ironclad. 17 steps sounds serious, sounds rigorous. Until you read Step 12, buried inside a policy amendment from 2009. Manager discretion may apply in low-risk scenarios. 4 words. No definition of low risk. No verification requirement afterward. No named authority responsible for oversight. Just 4 words and a decade of institutional silence surrounding them. Daniel Hargrove was the kind of person who read policy manuals the way other people read novels, hunting for plot holes. His colleagues found it mildly unsettling. His employers found it useful enough to hire him as a compliance officer, specifically tasked with internal red team auditing. He spent 3 weeks doing nothing but reading old policy drafts, amendment logs, memos that predated half the current staff. Most people would have quit by day 4. Daniel filled margins with questions. When he found Step 12, he didn't flag it immediately. He closed his laptop, went for a walk, and came back 2 hours later to read it again. Because sometimes you need to make sure you're actually seeing what you think you're seeing. He had 3 questions. Who defines low risk? Who approves the manager's discretion? Who verifies the outcome afterward? The answer to all 3 was the same: nobody, specifically. And that ambiguity was the entire problem. Daniel proposed a controlled test, a sandboxed account completely isolated from real funds, set up specifically for the audit, would simulate a real transfer request. Every executive signed off. Regulators were informed. The test was fully documented and legal. It began on a Monday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, using nothing but standard internal tools and the exact language of Step 12, Daniel had bypassed 4 of the 17 supposedly mandatory steps, including 2 designated compliance checkpoints. No code was written, no system was hacked. He filled out the right forms, used the right language, and cited the right footnote. The system waved him through without a single alarm. Here's what made this genuinely disturbing. It wasn't easy. Daniel made 7 failed attempts before finding the right combination of bureaucratic phrasing that invoked the clause without triggering a secondary review flag. 7 tries. From someone who already knew exactly where to look. Think about what that means. If a trained compliance expert needed 7 attempts working from the inside, a patient and motivated bad actor, one with no ethical boundaries and unlimited time, would simply keep going until they found it too. The audit team watching Daniel's test grew visibly quieter as the hours passed. Some had assumed the system would catch the anomaly automatically. It didn't. Others assumed a supervisor would notice an unusual approval pattern and intervene. Nobody did. The silence in that room said everything the policy manual had failed to say for 15 years. Daniel submitted his findings, expecting immediate action. What he got instead was hesitation. Internal leadership questioned the methodology. One senior director suggested the test conditions were unrealistic. Another asked whether the findings needed to be escalated externally at all. This is the part of the story nobody talks about enough. Daniel was hired specifically to surface risks exactly like this one. He had done precisely his job, and he was still being asked to justify whether the problem was real. That resistance, not the loophole itself, is where institutions actually break. He pushed anyway, and when forensic accountants finally ran a historical review of the transaction logs, the room went completely silent. There wasn't just a theoretical vulnerability. There were 11 anomalous transactions carrying authorization signatures of managers who had already left the company. One signature belonged to someone who had been gone for 2 years. The loophole hadn't just been sitting there waiting. It had already been used. Before we go further, have you ever spotted something wrong in a system and been told it wasn't actually a problem? Drop it in the comments, because what happens next makes that feeling hit very differently. Daniel's report landed on the CEO's desk on a Tuesday morning. By afternoon, 3 emergency board meetings had been called. By Wednesday, external regulators had been formally notified, a legal obligation that Meridian's own lawyers had quietly pushed to delay as long as possible. Tuesday, 3 meetings. Wednesday, regulators called. Nobody slept well that week. The question that consumed everyone was brutal in its simplicity. Had actual money been stolen or only the process compromised? Forensic accountants were brought in. Every suspicious transaction was traced, cross-referenced, queried again. The investigation would take 6 months. The uncertainty ate through the institution like acid. Employees who had done nothing wrong watched colleagues placed on administrative leave. Morale collapsed. Rumors traveled faster than any official communication. The institution that had prided itself on stability for decades suddenly felt like it was standing on glass. The forensic review ultimately found no confirmed large-scale theft. Most anomalous transactions were attributed to procedural negligence and unauthorized credential sharing, serious violations, but not organized crime. 3 senior managers were terminated. 2 others resigned before the process concluded. Meridian rebuilt. Step 12 was rewritten entirely, replacing manager discretion with hard, mandatory verification requirements. The credential management system was overhauled from the ground up. And for the first time in its history, Meridian hired a permanent independent audit team, one that reported directly to the board, not to internal leadership. Total cost of the overhaul, estimated at over $40 million. Legal fees, investigation, system rebuild, reputational damage, client attrition. $40 million for 4 ambiguous words in a footnote that nobody reviewed for 15 years. The Meridian case quietly became a reference point across the compliance industry. It appeared in regulatory white papers. Business schools added it to risk management curricula. Financial institutions in several countries cited it when overhauling their own discretionary override policies. The ripple moved beyond banking. Technology companies began auditing policy documents with the same scrutiny they applied to source code. Healthcare institutions re-examined override clauses in data access protocols. Government agencies launched internal red team exercises modeled on exactly what Daniel had done. One honest report from one compliance officer who refused to be talked out of his findings, and an entire sector got measurably safer. That's how systemic change sometimes actually works. Not through visionary leadership speeches, through one uncomfortable conversation that someone refused to drop. There's a version of this story where Daniel accepts the pushback, softens his findings, and the loophole quietly disappears back into the policy manual for another decade. That version ends very differently. What saved Meridian imperfectly, expensively, but genuinely, was a person who understood that being right isn't enough. You have to stay right under pressure. Institutional inertia is not neutral. It always moves in the direction of comfortable assumptions, and comfortable assumptions are precisely where the cracks live. The door metaphor fits here. Imagine a door installed for a room that was later demolished. The room is gone. The door still opens. For 15 years, everyone walked past it because nobody remembered it led somewhere dangerous. Daniel was the first person to actually try the handle. The loophole was one sentence. The failure was cultural. And the fix, the real fix, had to be 2. If this case changes how you see the systems around you, share it with someone who builds them. Subscribe for more stories like this, where the real lesson isn't the exploit, but what it reveals about the humans on both sides of it. And leave a comment. What's the smallest thing you've seen cause the biggest collapse? I want to know.